Tonight on Reporting Scotland, almost a third of sports could have coaches who work with children and who don't have the required background checks. We have an exclusive report. An air, land and sea search for a kayaker missing off the northeast coast continues. MSP's call for Scotland to have control over immigration after Brexit. We look at attitudes to EU migration.
Immigration was my main reason for voting for it. For the simple reasons that, well, obviously there's a lot of people coming into the country just now and a lot of them maybe shouldn't be here.
Yeah, I think they do contribute. They do work. They do come to work. They don't want to sit and do nothing here.
And we'll have an update from Westminster as MPs try to amend the Brexit bill. Also on the programme, international cooperation helped catch these drug smugglers in Scottish waters. Now the Lord Advocate claims that cooperation could be lost after we leave the EU. And they held back the Irish. Can the Scotland defence tackle the French? Good evening. Almost a third of sports in Scotland could have coaches who work with children and who don't have the required background checks. Sport Scotland, the government-funded agency that runs sport, has provided figures showing major sports such as football and swimming are failing to guarantee those who should be checked are checked. Well, Chris McLaughlin is here to tell us more. Chris.
Well, Jackie, in the past few months, football has been rocked by historic allegations of child abuse. We've uncovered examples here by people in the game, troubling stories from people like Peter Haynes, who told us he was abused for years by Hugh Stevenson, who was a coach and international match official. This led to the Scottish Football Association launching an independent inquiry. But what about other sports? How robust are their child protection policies? One way of testing that is by looking at background checks. Coaches working with children should have what's known as a PVG check. This stands for Protecting Vulnerable Groups. Now, a total of 45 governing bodies through Sport Scotland have provided figures about coaches who should have up-to-date checks and those who do. We found that at the time of asking, 14 of the 45 sports had a shortfall. That means coaches working with children without the required checks. Here's swimming, for example. 170 of 915 coaches who work with children don't have up-to-date PVG checks. That's nearly a fifth. So what about the reaction? Well, let's start first of all with Sport Scotland.
Yeah, there can be gaps where you have maybe new coaches coming into the system, so PVG checks are in the system and in process. We also have coaches who no longer work with children and shouldn't be disclosed because they're not active in those environments anymore. So this is a changing landscape all the time. Ultimately, I would urge parents to go and speak to the child protection officer in clubs because they're the ones that have the legislative duty to ensure the checks are carried out and are in place. And rightly, that would be the first point of contact for anybody that has any concerns.
Well, I am concerned, and I'm sure it'll be a concern for parents across Scotland. I mean, not only do we need a comprehensive system of disclosure checks, that's absolutely essential, but I think we need a consistency, and what's come through in these figures is that consistency is not yet there, so that's a major concern.
Well, Chris is with me now. We heard the Conservative spokesman speaking there and asking how concerned should parents be?
Well, it's probably worth pointing out, Jackie, that the numbers for some of the sports are pretty small, and the explanation could be, as Sport Scotland say, that this is just administrative. But two things. Firstly, some governing bodies are completely up to date. Some large governing bodies, like athletics, for example. So why no consistency, as Liz Smith is asking? Secondly, we first asked for these figures in mid-December, so the governing bodies have had weeks to sort out any shortfalls. The big question is, why can't they?
Thank you very much, Chris. A major search off the Aberdeenshire coast for a missing, inexperienced kayaker has so far failed to find him. Dominic Jackson, who's 35, was reported missing after he failed to return home on Sunday night after going on a weekend trip from Portsoy. His family say they are desperately worried. Well, Stephen Duff is in Portsoy for us tonight. Stephen.
Jackie, it was here at Portsoy Harbour last night where the search for Dominic Jackson started. He was reported overdue by his housemate and his camper van was found here. Now, despite a search in the air, at sea and on land today, there's been no sign of him. Coast Guards begin a fresh search of the coastline.
To relinquish the search warrant.
A major search was launched last night when 35-year-old Dominic Jackson was reported missing.
It's quite difficult terrain to search in some places, but obviously our guys on the ground will do the best that they can today.
And what else have you got involved in the search?
We've also got lifeboats from Buckie, Macduff and Fraserburgh who are searching the coastline, as well as aircraft from Her Majesty's Coast Guard.
Dominic had set out from Portsoy Harbour on Saturday morning to go sea kayaking. There's been no sign of him or his distinctive kayak since. He's described as super fit, but a newcomer to the sport. Visibility was good and conditions calm as the air and sea search resumed this morning. A Police Scotland kayak team set off to check the rugged coastline west towards Pennin. Mr Jackson's father and brother have joined the search. His sister Ellie is watching from her home in Australia.
There's so many inlets and coves and different places where Dom could have either come ashore and been stuck by sheer cliffs, or come ashore with his kayak, climbed up on a rock to take a photo and slipped and fallen. Who knows where he is? There's no reason for us to think he's gone offshore. So we're hoping if the boat's capsized, he's managed to swim to shore and he's stuck waiting on the rocks, waiting to be rescued. That's what we're holding out hope for.
This afternoon, Coast Guard teams focused on rocks at Banff, an apparent false alarm in the search for Dominic Jackson. The search will continue, say police, but strong gale force conditions are expected on the coast this evening. Well, the winds really have picked up here in the last wee while, so any meaningful search tonight unlikely. There's no sense yet the search is being called off at all. Police Scotland this afternoon confirmed the last sighting of Dominic Jackson was between 10:30 and 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, when he was asking locals here at Portsoy the best places to go sea kayaking.
Thank you very much for that update, Stephen. Later this evening, MPs will begin a detailed scrutiny of the legislation that will start the process of leaving the EU. One of the many amendments put forward focuses on immigration and a proposal to allow EU nationals already here to stay here. Well, we'll get more from Westminster in just a moment. But first, what is the reality of EU immigration in Scotland? Well, at the moment, there are more than 180,000 people here who've come from the European Union. They include 30,000 employed in catering and related trades and 12,000 in health and social work. Farming also relies heavily on migrant workers. Well, now a Holyrood committee has said Scotland should be allowed to set its own immigration rules. Our political editor, Brian Taylor, reports.
Meet Beata Bialuka. She's studying accountancy in Inverness. Her husband, also Polish, has a decorating business. They have 3 children.
Lots of Polish people, they actually do set up their own businesses. So they pay taxes, of course. Yeah, I think they do contribute. They do work. They do come to work. They don't want to sit and do nothing here.
This is the northeast port of Banff. BBC analysis suggests it had the largest Scottish mainland support for leaving the EU. Fears about fishing would have played a part, but there's another concern.
Immigration was my main reason for voting for it. For the simple reasons that, well, obviously there's a lot of people coming into the country just now and a lot of them maybe shouldn't be here.
But every Scottish council area voted Remain. In Banff, there are EU supporters too.
I voted to stay in the EU because I feel it would be better for us.
Today's Holyrood report says rural Scotland particularly needs workers to come here from the EU. Scottish Cabinet Ministers meeting in Pitlochry say that applies generally, that Scotland relies more than the rest of the UK on migrants to contribute skills and taxation.
Undoubtedly, immigration is one of these areas where there are different needs across the UK. I know there are real concerns about immigration, but the Scottish economy is heavily dependent on people who come to Scotland from other countries, and if that was suddenly to stop or be severely restricted, then the impact on our economy would be severe.
The Tories say Scotland will need migrants, but they want to focus on relevant skills, not geography.
Our preferred route as Scottish Conservatives is a sectoral variation which would allow different areas of employment to be able to ensure that we had an immigration policy that allowed people to come in who could work in those industries. And that, of course, would be true across the whole of the United Kingdom, not just in Scotland.
As for Beata, she just wants to build a life in Scotland.
Well, Nick Eardley, our parliamentary correspondent, is at Westminster for us, covering the Article 51 debate going on tonight. So, Nick, which amendments have the greatest support?
Well, Jackie, one in a similar vein, which would guarantee the rights of EU nationals already living here, is attracting quite a lot of support. Some opposition parties say their rights have to be guaranteed now. So far, the UK government is saying that until it has reciprocal promises that the rights of British citizens in Europe will be guaranteed, it's not going to offer that. But if it's forced to a vote, it's possible that some Conservatives would rebel, that could be forced through. Now, the House of Commons has already backed the principles behind the legislation that would give the Prime Minister the power to trigger Article 50. This is about adding some conditions. So at the moment, MPs are discussing the level of scrutiny that they should have over the process. And later on tonight, they'll be discussing the role of devolved legislatures like the Scottish Parliament. I don't think that will necessarily lead to a new formal role for Holyrood. It certainly won't lead to a veto, but it will be discussed potentially quite late into the night. That debate is scheduled to last till well after midnight.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. Well, our political editor, Brian Taylor, joins me now. So while that debate is going on at Westminster, MSPs have another opportunity to debate tomorrow.
They do, Jackie. A Scottish Government motion saying don't go ahead with Article 50, don't trigger Brexit. Now, Nicola Sturgeon has already conceded that Holyrood cannot veto the Brexit process. They can be consulted, they can put their tuppence worth in, but they cannot have a veto. So why go ahead with the vote at all? Well, they say Nicola Sturgeon will argue that this is a very significant vote in the history of devolution because it gives a chance for the Scottish Parliament to reflect the views of the Scottish people, the majority view as expressed in the referendum. In other words, what I think she is saying is that it gives a chance for Holyrood to put down a marker, to put down a demand to Westminster, and if those demands are not, in the views of the SNP, met, then guess what? We could be looking at a second independence referendum. The intriguing thing, of course, is that Labour's position in Holyrood is different from the one they adopted at Westminster. Presumably to keep in line with the majority views of the Scottish people, they will vote against at Holyrood, against triggering Article 50.
And what are the Conservatives at Holyrood saying?
The Conservatives have got rather a lot to say on both of those positions. First of all, they accuse the SNP of seeking to foment disquiet and dissent and cause further support for independence. They say it's a stunt, and they say that Labour has fallen for it. On Labour, on the SNP in particular, they say that their arguments that this is a hugely significant vote are bizarre, given the fact that they concede that it doesn't have the constitutional power. But generally, people accept it is entirely right for the Scottish Parliament to have a say. It's whether that say is heeded in any formal way by Westminster and by the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Brian. Well, staying with Brexit, Scotland's senior prosecutor, the Lord Advocate, claims that leaving the EU could leave the country at risk of being a safe haven for international criminals. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Reval Alderson, can tell us more.
3.2 tonnes of cocaine recovered in the North Sea off Aberdeen, Scotland's largest drug seizure. The drugs, with a street value of £500 million, were hidden on a tug intercepted by Royal Navy and Coast Guard vessels as a result of international intelligence sharing. But could that level of cooperation be at risk after Brexit?
If we had, for example, no robust legal arrangements for the extradition of individuals wanted for trial in other countries, is that we would become a safe haven for criminals. Equally, if we were unable to extradite to Scotland people whom we wish to prosecute, then plainly our criminal justice system would be prejudiced.
Scotland's criminal justice agencies say international collaboration is vital in the fight against organised crime and terrorism. Last year, Police Scotland was responsible for the arrests of 78 people on the wanted list of the European police agency Europol. 23 Scots who'd fled abroad were returned home using European arrest warrants. These took on average 42 days for fugitives to face justice, compared to 9 months before the warrant system was in place. Marek Harchar was arrested in Slovakia for the murder of Glasgow businesswoman Moira Jones. He was swiftly brought back to Scotland for trial after his DNA profile was flagged by police in his home country.
There's a thing called the European Information System. Yep.
Police Scotland's International Assistance Unit at Gartcosh carries out the liaison work with forces across the world. The Justice Secretary says its work depends heavily on European collaboration.
If we come out of Europol and we only have a shared level of intelligence with them post-Brexit, there is no doubt that will have a negative impact on policing in Scotland. And what we need to do is to make sure that whatever future arrangements are put in place is that Police Scotland have as much of a direct link with Europol as possible.
Romanian police officers are currently working with colleagues here at Gartcosh in the International Assistance Unit. It's the sort of international cooperation that the Scottish Government fears may be lost if criminal justice matters aren't at the heart of Brexit negotiations. Reval Alderson, reporting Scotland, the Scottish Crime Campus.
It's almost 7:15. A reminder now of tonight's main story. Almost a third of sports could have coaches who work with children and who don't have the required background checks. And still to come, the school children helping to preserve the nation's rich sound heritage. Female genital mutilation is a crime in Scotland, but that's no guarantee that girls living here aren't sent abroad to have it carried out. Today, organisations campaigning against the practice gathered for a conference in Edinburgh. Joanne Macaulay has been speaking to some FGM survivors and hearing their graphic descriptions of what happened.
Aisha and Fatima live in Scotland now, but aged 6 and 7 they were subjected to FGM in Sudan. Decades later, the memories are still vivid.
9 movements were holding me, my head, my hands and my legs. And then I started to say, no, I want to go. And then they put a big piece of cloth in my mouth. The moment they done that, because I'm a mouth breather, I lost conscious. And I woke up hours later, they were shaking me and they were splashing water in my face near the river because they were celebrating the purification.
There were 3 of them on each side trying to restrain me. It was a very painful and scary experience, the most severe pain I've ever had. The pain continued for 3 days. I was bleeding for 40 days.
A conference in Edinburgh today heard that women are often scared to speak out because of reprisals from their own communities. In some countries, FGM is referred to as purification or circumcision. But those working with survivors in Scotland say it's a form of abuse which leaves women traumatised and terrified.
I see people fearing FGM for their children. I see people being affected by FGM coming here from different countries who experience FGM, who are survivors of FGM. And I see broken lives, I see broken people.
Nobody has been prosecuted in Scotland for FGM, but organisations suspect that girls living here can be taken abroad for the procedure.
It is not only the mum or the dad who doesn't want to do it, but it's the external force from the community, from the neighbours, from the extended family, and they are forced or pressurised to continue this practice.
Women like Aisha and Fatima say awareness and education are key to eliminating the practice which was so damaging for them. Joanne Macaulay, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
A search is continuing in Dumfries for a man who was seen to fall into the River Nith last night. Police say 41-year-old Brian Cowie from Dumfries went into the water near the Nithsdale Rowing Club just before 9 o'clock. A major search involving police, fire and Coast Guard teams, the Nith inshore rescue boat and a search and rescue helicopter was stood down in the early hours but resumed at first light. Divers from the Police Scotland Underwater Unit have also been called in. Now let's take a look at other stories from across the country. A woman's been charged in relation to reports of assaults on young children at a private nursery in Fraserburgh. Police Scotland says a 20-year-old woman has been reported to the Procurator Fiscal. The force says it's been working closely with the Care Inspectorate on the issue. Aberdeen City Council is warning it faces making cuts of more than £21.5 million. It could mean the number of staff will be reduced by around 200, although it's hoping to avoid compulsory redundancies. The authority has the opportunity to generate money by raising the council tax, although no final decision has been made. 38 residents have been in temporary accommodation following a fire in an Aberdeen block of flats on Friday. Others have been allowed to return following the incident in Froghall Gardens. The first Dark Sky Park conference to be held in Europe will be staged in Dumfries and Galloway in September. The Galloway Forest Park has already achieved Dark Sky Park status. Organisers say they hope the event in Gatehouse of Fleet will give a further boost to the area. A fiddle player from Glenfarg in Perthshire, Charlie Stewart, has won the BBC Radio Scotland Young Traditional Musician Award for 2017. The 21-year-old gave a rousing performance at the City Halls in Glasgow last night. He wins a recording session with BBC Scotland. Scotland's opening match of the Six Nations rugby on Saturday was one to savour. The team's victory over Ireland was the first time Scotland had won their opening match since, wait for it, 2006. Well, the former Scotland rugby captain Al Kellogg says the current team boasts the best defence he's ever seen. Rona McLeod reports.
Laidlaw digging, gives it wide now.
It was an absolute dream start for Scotland. Stuart Hogg, the try scorer, not once, but twice within the first 21 minutes.
Tries for Scotland.
And while Scotland were on form in attack, in defence it was tackle after tackle after tackle.
That Scotland defence was as good as I've seen it probably ever. It was any time the Irish were coming at them, they were getting hit back, they were getting hit hard, they were putting them under enormous pressure.
An outstanding first half. The Scots led by 21 points to 8. But then Ireland fought back and some feared another glorious failure. But this time was different. The Scots lost their lead but remained composed. The trusty boot of Greg Laidlaw saved the day and Scotland go into their second match as winners.
It will be very tough. The French are a different animal at home, so they'll be looking in front of their home fans to put in a great performance. And the first thing you need to do, as you say, is deal with the big enormous French pack. But from our point of view, from the Scotland point of view, it's about concentrating on producing another good performance. Producing another good performance, we're going to trouble every single team in this championship, and you never know what can happen.
But this is Vern Cotter's moment, and these are Scotland's moments.
All focus now on Sunday in Paris. The Scots with the momentum from their opening game. Rona McLeod, reporting Scotland.
Well, I hope the crowd are in fine voice. A project is underway in Scotland's schools to help preserve the nation's rich sound heritage. Children in Dundee, Fife and Angus have been listening to and learning traditional songs, as well as finding out how they were recorded. Here's Andrew Anderson.
Don't sit on my Jimmy Shans, don't sit on my Jimmy Shans.
Don't sit on my Jimmy Shand.
That's true.
The Scottish bandleader made so many 78 records, they were called after him. It's one of the gems these children at Forthill Primary in Dundee have learned.
Call me precious, I don't mind.
They've been part of a project to preserve Scotland's rich recording history.
It's actually a fundamental part of how we understand ourselves, particularly because the kinds of stories that the songs often communicate are the kind of thing that doesn't often enter into books, so it's not part of official learning.
Schools in Dundee, Fife and Angus have been taking part. As well as learning the songs, the children have been finding out the many different ways in which sound has been recorded over the last 100 years or so, from wax cylinders like these to tape and into the digital age. The project's been led by the National Library of Scotland.
It's been really good to see how the kids might now have a better understanding than their parents and grandparents as to how these older recordings have been kept.
And what about the youngsters themselves, the children of the digital age? Well, they've had a few surprises.
I was quite surprised about the wax cylinder and what 78s were made out of.
What was the most interesting thing you found out?
How records and stuff evolved into CDs that we have now today.
Because it's very different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have records or CDs at home?
My dad does.
It's hoped Scotland's rich heritage of sound will be safe with these youngsters to pass on to the next generation. Andrew Anderson, reporting Scotland, Dundee.
And now the here and now, time for the weather with Judith.
Good evening. Well, we do start the week on a wet and windy note, but come the end of the week, it's turning much colder. Now, today we did see some lovely pictures. Here's one of the Bassrock in all her glory sent in from one of our weather watchers. Tonight, wet and windy, and that rain, no strong winds already affecting a good part of the country, turning readily to snow over higher ground. Some higher routes inland will be affected. Gales widely along the west coast into the severe category for a time before easing, and we do have gales across the Northern Isles as well. The rain eventually becoming confined to the far north east and the Northern Isles, with just 1 or 2 showers in the west. Then, as temperatures fall away under clearing skies, we will turn our attention to ice. Temperatures down to around about freezing. There's a Met Office yellow be aware warning for fairly widespread ice across inland parts of the country, so that will be a concern first thing tomorrow morning. Now, the weather front responsible for tonight's rain will continue to affect parts of eastern Scotland through the course of the day tomorrow. So first thing tomorrow, there'll be a lot of dry weather in the forecast, apart from 1 or 2 showers across western areas, and the trend will be for it to brighten up. So come the afternoon, I think we should see some good sunny spells for the southwest, although more in the way of cloud, maybe 1 or 2 showers for the southern uplands. Similarly, for the Inner Hebrides, we'll see 1 or 2 showers. It will feel colder tomorrow too. Those winds, we do lose the winds, except something breezier along the west coast. Good sunny spells for the wet northwest corner and the Western Isles, and that rain waxing and waning over the Northern Isles, but we will see something dry for Orkney and for the northeast too, although again the rain will return to parts of eastern Scotland as we head through the course of the day. Staying predominantly cloudy across eastern areas, and it will feel cold as well. As far as the rest of the afternoon is concerned, we will start to see the rain gathering force across eastern areas. Then during the course of tomorrow night it pushes in, but in the west it'll be dry with clear spells and a widespread frost. So if we take a look at the pressure chart, you can see high pressure over Scandinavia just waiting in the wings, but this weather front continuing to bring cloudier conditions across eastern Scotland and some showers as well across the east, always drier in the west. So you can see we have this blocking high over Scandinavia just waiting to take hold. It really will settle things down, but it will introduce much colder air come the end of the week. So for the end of the week, we're looking at turning colder. We'll see some wintry showers in the east, and we'll also see a chilly wind. That's your forecast.
And now a reminder of tonight's main news. BBC Scotland has learned almost a third of sports here could have coaches who work with children and who don't have the required background checks. And a major search off the Aberdeenshire coast for a missing, inexperienced kayaker has so far failed to find him. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'm back with the headlines at 8 and our main evening bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. But from all of us here, goodbye.